I love the term word salad. When used improperly, it means, I don't understand the big words you used. But when used properly, it describes either something said that is total nonsense or something said by someone who wants to make themselves look like your intellectual superior by using far too many doctorate level words in a sentence that they don't typically understand themselves when normal words would be totally acceptable. We've all seen it, and sadly, as Catholics, we've seen this from Pope Francis. He's not one to bust out the academic words for no reason, but he often says things that leave the listener scratching their heads. Personally, while it is in the moment amusing to see, coming from the same pontiff that wrote Fratelli Tutti, from the same pontiff coordinating the Holy See with what can only be described as either the infrastructure of the beast or its forerunner, it's maddening to see because we know he's far smarter than some of his statements or actions would indicate. I've got a head scratcher for you today as we head into the American Thanksgiving weekend, and I think I've put some pieces together that you'll find interesting here. Yesterday, I told you about the adventures of Pope Francis's Instagram account. It was a story that didn't really interest me until the Vatican said that no one on their team liked an immodest image of a barely dressed woman using the papal Instagram account, and that they were formally asking Instagram, the social media company, to look into what happened. Now, if you don't know, Instagram is part of Facebook. They're owned by them. Think about that for a moment. And while the Instagram story is an interesting story, it should point to something bigger. Social media used by public figures is by itself interesting in general. Here's something to remember. Francis does not use his own Twitter account. He doesn't use his own Instagram or his own Facebook accounts. He has a team for that, most certainly located in the Vatican Communications Office, the same office that Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church has an official role in. We know it wasn't Pastor Jimmy using the Instagram account for clear reasons, but it should be said that Francis doesn't use his own account. Most of the time, the Francis account tweets out pretty bland and empty but generically Christian messages, mostly of the feel-good variety. But sometimes the account quotes his encyclicals and speeches promoting the new Tower of Babel project that he is currently engaged in. Those tweets usually quote Fratelli Tutti or Laudato Si or something like that. When he wants you to know what he really thinks, he gives a speech on an airplane to an audience who will repeat his words for the whole world to hear, and we collectively cringe. Or, as is often the case, he'll speak to Eugenio Scalfari. And then we're left to wonder if what is reported out of those talks is true. Increasingly, I suspect that they are. I'll get to that at the end, though. Whenever we get a lot of the following kinds of messages from Pope Francis, I begin to wonder what he's working on. It's waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I don't know why I get that way. But let's look at two of his recent public messages because taken by themselves they're a hoot, and we'll take a look at some other things going on and you'll see. Both of these tweets were sent on November 22nd. For those keeping score, this was happening at the same time that Francis was having a big conference on the Tower of Babel project, with Leonardo Boff as his main speaker. Again, more on that in a moment. Here's the tweet. We were not created to dream about vacations or the weekend, but to make God's dreams come true in this world. God made us capable of dreaming, so that we could embrace the beauty of life. The works of mercy are the most beautiful works in life. End quote. What does he mean by works of mercy? If he were to say that the spiritual works of mercy are the most beautiful in life because they bring the salvific light of Christ to people, opening them to baptism, the Eucharist, and of course, to a living, vibrant faith in Jesus Christ, I'd agree. But is that what he means? I have no idea, and that's kind of the point, I suspect. Imagine if Catholicism were presented by a marketing committee and designed to be the least challenging thing imaginable when you get these kinds of statements. But here's another one. Quote, Dear young people, let us not give up on great dreams. The Lord does not want us to narrow our horizons or to remain parked on the roadside of life. He wants us to race boldly and joyfully towards lofty goals. End quote. What does that even mean? Race boldly and joyfully towards lofty goals. If the lofty goal is sanctity and bypassing purgatory and going straight to heaven, then yes, I agree. But again, this is the happy meal of theology. These tweets are excerpts from his Christ the King homily. Maybe Christ the Dreamer is more apt for how he sees this, but that wasn't the only thing going on the Feast of Christ the King. Over the weekend, we had a big meeting for the Tower of Babel project in Vatican City, whose aim is to create an earthly paradise. And its big speaker was Leonardo Boff, a former Jesuit priest who hung up his clericals in the name of fraternity and ecology. Boff had been told by the Vatican several times in past decades to stop promoting his odd program, which blended essentially what Our Lady warned us of at Fatima with a concern for what Francis calls our common home. In fact, the term common home comes from Boff's work. He used the term common home at least as far back as 2005. I have 2 of his books, which I had to use for my doctoral dissertation. His theology of liberation is definitely something to behold, and his influence is far-reaching. The Vatican attempted to adopt some of his ideas back in the 1990s without embracing him, and, well, now we have Francis. Go figure. Francis's odd tweets are actually indicative of something bigger. I call it the Tower of Babel project because there's clearly an attempt to create an earthly paradise. Go through Francis's pontificate, all the way to the beginning. His vision seems to be of a Catholicism with no challenges, one that is about group hugs and handshakes and not about carrying our crosses. I honestly don't know how else to describe it. The Vatican released this piece on what his homily that day was, which again coincided with Boff's presence in the Vatican. Quote, Pope Francis celebrated Mass in St. Peter's Basilica for the Solemnity of Christ the King, observed annually on the last Sunday of the liturgical year. The Holy Father used the day's Gospel, with Jesus' discourse on the Last Judgment, as the starting point for his homily. Before pouring out his love for us on the cross, Jesus shared his final wishes, the Pope said. He tells us that the good we do to one of our least brothers and sisters, whether hungry or thirsty, a stranger, in need, we do to him. We can all ask ourselves whether we put these works into practice, the Pope continued, emphasizing Jesus' words, I am here, that is, Jesus is present in the least of these. Speaking especially to young people, Pope Francis said, let us not give up on great dreams. Let us not settle for what is necessary. He reminded them that we are created to make God's dreams come true in this world. We can do that by making great choices. End quote. Making great choices. What about faith in Christ the King? It was, after all, his homily for the Novus Ordo Feast of Christ the King. In the traditionalist world, we observe it on the old calendar back in October, for those wondering. Is the act of faith, is the teaching of the faith to others, one of those good choices? Intuitively, we'd say yes, but the track record for Francis says otherwise. This brings me to Eugenio Scalfari. If you don't know, Scalfari is Francis's friend. They've been lifelong friends, and, well, it's an odd friendship. Francis has given him at least 20 interviews since 2013, and at least half of them had resulted in Scalfari saying that Francis made some statement that immediately required the Vatican to, quote-unquote, clarify what he meant by saying things that not only contradict Catholicism, but often run the opposite of it. And of course, Scalfari is known for not writing anything down and running entirely off his memory. Convenient. Sometimes those clarifications were needed, but they never ever came from the Vatican. Recently, Scalfari issued another statement that didn't get much attention, at least in my part of the world, due to everything going on. In that statement, he said, to paraphrase, that Francis wants to build, again, what I call the new Tower of Babel, and he wants to be its spiritual leader. This project is, for anyone observing, material in nature. Hence why, for example, Francis met with American professional basketball players 2 days ago in Vatican City to talk about whatever it is that they've got going on right now. It certainly wasn't anything to do with the faith or with participating with the church to achieve a corporal work of mercy. Instead, the new Tower of Babel is to make the church into just another agency, one among many, and Francis and his successors to be not only its spiritual head, but the spiritual head of all similar ones as well. After all, Fratelli Tutti, right? The tweets I started with are indicative of that. They're the kind of word salad that anyone can accept if they don't really think too much about it. It's more of what we've come to know from him. Now, I'm interested in your thoughts on this in the comments, please. Should we try to make Christ's hopes and dreams come true? Or is Francis talking about another Christ? I'm confused. Please pray for the church. Thanks for listening. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.